They joined the Washington Post, admitting that the hands up, don't shoot was all built on a lie. Public editor Margaret Sullivan of the Times previously criticized the paper's, quote, dubious equivalency by including anonymous sources, vindicating Officer Wilson alongside named witnesses who claim Michael Brown was shot while surrendering. Sullivan today backtracked, writing this. In retrospect, it's clear to me that including that information wasn't false balance. It was an effort to get both sides. What I wrote was substantially flawed. At the Times, that amounts to a correction. Joining me now, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke. Sheriff, great to have you here.
Thanks, Lou. Pleasure to be with you.
What do you make of first the Washington Post, one of its leading reporters, then the editorial board, admitting that the hands up, don't shoot, it was all based on a lie, and then the Times following in quick succession?
Well, the liberal mainstream media got caught up in the hype, and they piled on. They got their kicks in at the Ferguson Police Department. Officer Darren Wilson and cops nationwide, police officers nationwide, and that whole thing. It was a shameful period of time for the media, who's supposed to, they have a responsibility under the First Amendment to get to the truth and to kind of be neutral in these things. And instead, they became a wholly owned subsidiary of the cop-hating crowd.
Yeah, and it's a shame because this administration has, it seems to me, been effectively the leader of the anti-law enforcement efforts that were moving the country from August of last year through it to January of this year. Then there seemed a pause. Where do you think we are right now with the administration? This left-wing assault on law enforcement in this country, has it abated?
Well, I don't know if we're at that point yet, but I feel that we're bending this curve back in the direction in favor of the American police officer. Lou, I've been all over the country, radio, television, visiting different cities. We've always enjoyed the overwhelming support of law-abiding people in our communities nationwide. That doesn't come out that much, but it's starting to, people are starting to become more vocal. The people who appreciate the work of the men and women who put on this uniform every day and go out and serve their communities. We're starting to hear from them more, and that's starting to balance this cop hatred that we've heard over the last couple of months.
As I listen to some of the language by this president and some of the things that he said, I find myself wondering, what must he be thinking to talk that way about law enforcement officers, to talk about distrust of people of different color. He thinks he's sort of talking about race by not being bold, as Attorney General Holder would have suggested, but rather by skirting at the edges and the margin and really carrying sort of a dog whistle message of his own. And I find that appalling.
So do I. But he's, when I say he, the President of the United States has been successful with this divide and conquer political strategy that he's engaged in. It's won him 2 elections, electoral majorities in 2 presidential elections. He's pitted men against women in this fictitious war against women. He's pitted blacks against whites, rich against poor, the 99%, the 1%. And he's been successful with it. And so I wasn't surprised. I was disgusted that he would do that at a point in time when race relations have improved. I mean, anybody who would say they haven't, dealing with reality, do we have a long way to go? Of course, because we can always get better in that area. But to reopen that wound like he did, was unnecessary. He actually said that he thought that the racial discord was healthy for America. I was stunned by that statement. That stuff's never happened.
Especially for a man whose very presence in the Oval Office depends on the fact that he had talked about being a uniter, not a divider, a man who had talked about our commonalities instead of our differences, and then becomes an entirely different being once he assumed the office.
Well, that's what's so striking about this whole thing. I mean, the first African-American president, he occupies the highest office of the land, and he's going to talk about how we still have so far to go. I just found it, unfortunate, really. But I got tired of them laying all of the problems in these American ghettos at the foot of the American law enforcement officer. And I just thought that it was important for me, for their psyche, the cop that goes out every day, to continue to want to do this thing.
I just want to ask you very quickly as we wrap up here. A team of Justice Department lawyers are going to Ferguson soon to help decide whether to reform the police department. We've heard from the administration they basically want to disband it. Your thoughts?
Well, what we ought to disband is the pathologies and the maladies that make up the American ghetto. The federal government's done enough damage in Ferguson, and I wish they'd just stay out of there.
Sheriff David Clarke, good to see you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou.